Israel kills 20 in attack on Al-Mawasi camp in Gaza. Israeli airstrikes on Al-Mawasi camp in Gaza has killed at least 20 Palestinians and wounded dozens. Gaza's health ministry says Israeli attacks killed 30 Palestinians and wounded 84 in the latest 24-hour reporting period. Amjad Shawa, director of the Palestinian NGOs network, says humanitarian situation in Gaza is worsening as winter approaches with only a trickle of aid coming in. Israel's genocide in Gaza has killed at least 44,532 Palestinians and wounded 105,538 since October 7, 2023. At least 1,139 people were killed in Israel during the Hamas-led attacks that day, and more than 200 were taken captive. In Lebanon, at least 4,047 people have been killed and 16,638 wounded in Israeli attacks since the war on Gaza began. At least 44,532 people killed and 105,538 wounded in Israeli attacks on Gaza since October 7, 2023. More than 100 patients inside the besieged Kamal Adwan hospital in the north of the enclave are at risk of death. The Israeli army claims it targeted senior Hamas members in its attack on the Al-Mawasi camp in southern Gaza, where at least 20 Palestinians were killed. The Prisoners' Affairs Commission, PAC, and the Palestine Prisoners Society, PPS, have reported that a Palestinian detainee has died in Israeli detention. Israeli forces severely beat an elderly man on his land in the occupied West Bank town of Akraba in the Nablus Governorate. Qatar's PM says the incoming U.S. administration wants a Gaza ceasefire deal secured now, today even. UNRWA says Israel has increased a disinformation campaign against the agency through a series of billboard advertisements. Israeli army claims that the 6 captives found in Khan Younis in August could have been killed by Hamas, but refused to rule out that an Israeli air strike killed them. The Israeli military is not acting humanely or doing Palestinians a favor when it threatens them with death by bombing if they do not leave their homes and makeshift shelters. It is not driving exhausted, starving people constantly from one place to another under threat of death and maiming, using difficult-to-decipher guidance, out of humanitarian concern. It is doing so to ensure nowhere in Gaza is safe for Palestinians. It is trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, creating the illusion of adherence to humanitarian law while laying the groundwork for illegally expanding Israeli territory. Israel's growth forecast cut amid wars and conflicts. The Times of Israel is reporting that the country's wars on Gaza and Lebanon, as well as the conflict with Iran, are expected to continue to take a toll on the country's economy and finances. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, the evolving conflicts in the Middle East since October 2023 will continue to shape economic activity, the OECD said in its Economic Outlook report. After a fast recovery from the slump in the aftermath of October 7, 2023, private consumption has grown sluggishly, with consumer confidence remaining weak in October 2024. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry has condemned what it called brutal attacks by terrorist settler militias on 2 towns near Nablus in the occupied West Bank. The violent Israeli settlers set fire to property and vehicles in the towns amid intensifying daily assaults on Palestinians. The settlers have been emboldened to commit these crimes in the occupied territory by the glaring and unjustifiable failure of the global community to stop the Israeli killings, the ministry said. Reuters news agency is reporting that the incoming U.S. Middle East envoy met Qatari and Israeli PMs to push for a ceasefire and captives deal. A source briefed on the talks told Reuters that Steve Witkoff traveled to Qatar and Israel in late November to push for a deal before Trump's inauguration on January 20th. The meetings signal that Qatar has resumed its role as a key mediator after suspending it last month. The source added that Hamas negotiators would likely return to Doha soon to facilitate a new round of talks. Jordan's king. Failure to stop war will exacerbate regional conflict. Failure to stop Israel's war on Gaza will exacerbate the conflict and the cycle of violence in the region, according to Jordan's King Abdullah. He added that immediate action must be taken to pressure Israel to allow sufficient aid into the besieged enclave where more than 44,500 Palestinians have been killed since October last year. 6-year-old Nasser Tanatra is scared of the rock-strewn hilltop where he used to play and pick flowers near his family home. The boisterous child, the youngest of 7 siblings, used to dash to the top of Jabal al-Ras with his 10-year-old sister Yurud to gather wild sage and za'atar. But in mid-September, about 20 Israeli settlers, protected by soldiers, erected tents and began living on the hilltop, about 50 meters, 164 feet, from the family's two-story home. Ever since, they have attacked and harassed the Tanatras and their neighbors in the Palestinian village of Msafa. At night, the settlers fire bullets in the air and release aggressive dogs to roam outside villagers' homes. From above, they flash bright lights onto the houses, blare music, and sing loudly. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar says there may now be an opportunity to secure the return of the captives held in Gaza, the Times of Israel reports. Sa'ar, who was speaking at an OSCE Foreign Ministers Conference in Malta, said Israel is serious about reaching a deal to get them out and asked for the European Union's support in gaining a deal. According to Sa'ar's office, the minister told EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas that Israel wants to open a new page in our relations with the European Union, one of constructive dialogue and cooperation. Josep Borrell, Kallas's predecessor, regularly criticized Israel for its conduct in the wars on Gaza and Lebanon. Israeli forces arrest Palestinian patient in West Bank hospital raid. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the occupied West Bank said Israeli forces raided a hospital in Nablus and arrested a patient. The ministry in a statement called it a flagrant violation of all international laws and conventions that stipulate the protection of treatment centers and patients. Earlier, Palestinian media reported that special forces from the Israeli army stormed the Arab Specialized Hospital and arrested Ayman Ghanem, who was wounded in a bombing near the town of Aqaba on Tuesday. Israel claims it targeted Hamas members in deadly al-Mawasi attack. The Israeli army claims it targeted senior Hamas members in its attack on al-Mawasi camp in southern Gaza, where at least 20 Palestinians were killed. The army said secondary explosions that were identified suggested the presence of weaponry in the area. According to Palestinian civil defense teams, dozens of people were wounded in addition to those killed. Israeli officials say only agreement can bring back captives held in Gaza. The Israeli Broadcasting Authority quotes security sources as saying only an agreement can bring back the captives held in Gaza, adding that information about their whereabouts is dwindling. The officials also said those taken captive cannot be brought back alive by a military operation and a deal must be reached and concessions must be made. At least 10 people killed in Israeli attack on Gaza City. At least 10 Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood of Gaza City. Lebanon's ceasefire under strain after Israeli strikes and Hezbollah mortar fire. Deadly Israeli airstrikes and a mortar attack by Hezbollah have raised fears that the ceasefire in Lebanon could collapse. 10 people were killed in southern Lebanon on Monday night, the health ministry said, after Israel carried out its biggest wave of airstrikes since both sides agreed last week to end 14 months of conflict. The Israeli military said it struck Hezbollah fighters, launchers, and infrastructure and urged Lebanese authorities to prevent what it called the group's hostile activity. Hezbollah had earlier fired 2 mortars at an Israeli army base in a disputed border area, saying they were a warning over what it saw as repeated violations by Israel. No casualties were reported. The U.S., which along with France brokered the agreement and is monitoring compliance, said that largely speaking, the ceasefire was holding despite the violence. Under the deal, Hezbollah has been given 60 days to end its armed presence between the Blue Line, the unofficial border between Lebanon and Israel, and the Litani River, about 30 kilometers, 20 miles, to the north. Israeli forces must withdraw from the area over the same period, and Lebanese army troops and UN peacekeepers are due to deploy there. The conflict began on October 8, 2023, when Hezbollah firing rockets into northern Israel in support of Palestinians in Gaza the day after its ally Hamas's deadly attack on southern Israel. Israel launched an intense air campaign and ground invasion against the Iran-backed group in late September, saying it wanted to ensure the safe return of 60,000 residents of northern Israel displaced by the rocket attacks. Lebanese authorities say more than 3,960 people were killed during the hostilities, many of them civilians, and 1 million others were displaced from areas where Hezbollah has a strong presence. Israeli authorities say more than 80 Israeli soldiers and 47 civilians were killed. Lebanon's state-run national news agency, NNA, reported that Israeli warplanes carried out strikes in at least 11 areas of southern Lebanon on Monday night. They included the town of Haris, where the health ministry said 6 people were killed and 2 injured. Another 4 people were killed, and 1 was injured in the town of Talisay, according to the ministry. The Israeli military said in a statement that it struck Hezbollah terrorists, dozens of launchers, and terrorist infrastructure throughout Lebanon. It also said it hit the Hezbollah launcher in Burgaz that was used to fire 2 mortars towards the disputed Mount Dov/Sheba Farms area in the occupied Golan Heights. The projectiles fell in an open area and nobody was hurt. Hezbollah's launches tonight constitute a violation of the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon, it warned. The State of Israel demands that the relevant parties in Lebanon fulfill their responsibilities and prevent Hezbollah's hostile activity from within Lebanese territory. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, said it was determined to continue enforcing the ceasefire and will respond to every Hezbollah violation, minor and major. Hezbollah confirmed it carried out the mortar attack, saying it was a defensive and warning response to what it described as repeated violations by the Israeli enemy of the ceasefire agreement. It said they included firing on civilians and conducting airstrikes, as well breaches of Lebanese airspace by Israeli aircraft. Earlier on Monday, Lebanese authorities said 2 people had been killed in Israeli strikes in the south of the country. The health ministry said 1 person was killed in Marjaun, where a motorcycle was reportedly targeted, while Lebanese state security agency said a drone strike killed one of its personnel who was on duty in Nabatea. The Lebanese army also said a soldier was wounded when a drone targeted an army bulldozer near the northeastern town of Hermel, in the Bekaa Valley. The Israeli military said it had operated in southern Lebanon in response to several acts by Hezbollah in Lebanon that posed a threat to Israeli civilians in violation of the understandings between Israel and Lebanon. We are aware of reports regarding a soldier from the Lebanese military who was injured in one of the strikes, and the incident is under investigation, it added. Lebanese parliamentary speaker Nabi Berri, a Hezbollah ally who helped negotiate the deal, said, "The aggressive actions carried out by Israeli occupation forces represent a flagrant violation of the terms of the ceasefire." He added that Lebanese authorities had asked the committee formed to monitor enforcement of the ceasefire, comprising the U.S., France, Israel, Lebanon, and the UN peacekeeping force, UNIFIL, to declare where it stands on ongoing violations that have exceeded 54 breaches. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot meanwhile told his Israeli counterpart, Gideon Sa'ar, in a call that there was a need for all sides to respect the ceasefire in Lebanon, the foreign ministry said. Israeli public broadcaster Khan also reported that U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein had warned Israel over alleged violations. In a video posted online, Sa'ar said, "We hear claims that Israel is violating the ceasefire understandings in Lebanon. On the contrary," he warned that Israel would take action when armed Hezbollah fighters were identified south of the Litani River or they attempted to move weapons. Their presence south of the Litani River is the most basic violation of the understandings, he said. They must move north immediately. I want to emphasize, Israel is committed to the successful implementation of the ceasefire, but we will not accept a return to the situation as it stood before the conflict. U.S. officials said the ceasefire had been broadly successful, but there was a lot more work to do. We've gone from dozens of Israeli strikes down to 1 a day, maybe 2 a day, White House National Security spokesman John Kirby told reporters. We're going to keep trying and see what we can do to get it down to 0. Virtually no aid has reached besieged North Gaza in 40 days, UN says. Palestinians are facing diminishing conditions for survival in parts of northern Gaza under siege by Israeli forces because virtually no aid has been delivered in 40 days, the United Nations has warned. The UN said all its attempts to support the estimated 65,000 to 75,000 people in Beit Hanoun, Beit Lahia, and Jabalia this month had been denied or impeded, forcing bakeries and kitchens to shut down. Earlier this month, a UN-backed assessment said there was a strong likelihood that famine was imminent in areas of northern Gaza. The Israeli military has said its 6-week-long offensive targets regrouping Hamas fighters, and that it is facilitating civilian evacuations and supply deliveries to hospitals. Hundreds of people have been killed, and between 100,000 and 130,000 others have been displaced to Gaza City, where the UN has said essential resources like shelter, water, and healthcare are severely limited. Meanwhile, the U.S. vetoed a draft UN Security Council resolution that demanded an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. The 14 other Security Council members voted in favor, but the U.S. said the text did not explicitly call for the immediate release of the hostages being held by Hamas as part of a ceasefire. The resolution demands an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire to be respected by all parties, and further reiterates its demand for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Israel said the text was a resolution for appeasement of Hamas, but France said the resolution very firmly required the hostages' release. UN agencies had planned 31 missions to the besieged areas of North Gaza Governorate between the 1st and the 18th of November, according to the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA. 27 were rejected by Israeli authorities and the other 4 were severely impeded, meaning they were prevented from accomplishing all the work they set out to do. This is happening when the IPC